Estamos de vuelta. We are back. I am going to have a conversation with Aaron Frank. He's a Singularity Fellow. Is that right?
Yeah, well, global fellow at Singularity University. Who knows what these terms mean anymore?
What does it mean?
So there are a group of what are called fellows at Singularity who are responsible for overseeing a particular domain within the curriculum. And my domain is focused on augmented and virtual reality, mixed reality technologies.
So, if I say exponential thinking, what's the concept about that?
Yeah, I mean, that is really core to everything that Singularity as an organization focuses on. I think that's kind of like the unique perspective that it brings to emerging technology. And so what it means specifically is we now understand that the rate of change in the development of technology it's not incremental, it's not linear, it's exponential. And so it's really important to understand what that concept is. And we learn about exponential growth in high school algebra. It's not like a really crazy concept. It's some number that increases at a compound rate. That's the technical way of understanding it. But basically, at its simplest, it's about understanding that the pace of change, especially in these digital technologies, largely driven by improvements in computing power, is exponential. Maybe super easy way to understand. If I were to ask you to imagine taking 30 linear steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can imagine where you are 30 steps later, you're 30 meters away. If I were to ask you to do that in an exponential way, where you double every step, you go 2, then 4, then 8, at the end of 30 doubling steps, you've gone 1 billion meters. That's 26 times around the planet. And that's the difference. That's the gap between, incremental linear growth and exponential growth. And so exponential thinking is around understanding the implications of that concept applied to the development of emerging technology.
But did you have like a personal aha moment about this? And in any, can you recall one time in a specific?
Yeah, actually, so this is real. Like when I was a little kid, I remember this moment where it really became clear to me that I really wanted to understand the implications of this kind of exponential growth. And it happened in a moment where I forget how old I was. I was young. I was like 7 or 8, and my mom pointed out to me, we were in the car together, and she pointed out, she said, hey, you know how all of the technologies that we see in our world, we almost take for granted, most of the technologies that exist in the world today didn't exist 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We've lived in a history of human history where if you were hungry, you had to go into the woods and stab something to eat. Now we, grocery stores with blinking lights and digital technologies and, computational systems. That really clicked for me in that moment. It's like we are living in this very unique moment in the story of human history where the pace of technological change is like almost the defining feature of the world around us. And I remember even from when I was a little kid, I was always fascinated by this question of why is it that the pace of change in my experience of being alive as a human on planet Earth is so unique in this context of all this radical change. So yeah, ever since I was a little kid, I've always been trying to understand why we are living in this moment of such radical change in the pace of development of technology.
If anyone can look around, we can see the technology changing an exponential pace, but it is still hard for us to think about the out of the linear thinking. Why is that?
That's a really good question that I haven't really seen any convincing answers to specifically, why it is that the human sense-making system, for some reason, our nervous system just doesn't process compound growth, exponential growth in an intuitive way. It's so counterintuitive. And I've heard arguments from evolutionary biologists that will argue that there's nothing really in our evolutionary history that created any kind of fitness payoff for shaping a nervous system to be able to process compound growth, right? Like if you're a hunter in the savannah and we're really good at tracking linear incremental acceleration and speed changes, but there's nothing that really forces us to have to be able to internalize exponential growth. So it's not that we can't understand it. We have rational systems that can sit down and plot charts and do the math. Again, it's that intuitive capacity to understand exponential growth that we just don't have it. And evolutionary biology would argue that there was just nothing in our past that would encourage the need to be able to make sense of that kind of growth.
So sometimes we might feel overwhelmed about these concepts. How can these leaders can approach these concepts and not feel overwhelmed about this?
I would say that one of the biggest ways of navigating into the future is actually to focus less of our attention on these emerging technologies, because again, it's so overwhelming. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, pay attention to what's coming around emerging technology. But if you as a leader are really grounded in understanding what problem you're trying to solve, like what problem you care about, then it becomes almost like this empowered way of navigating into the future where you'll hear about a lot of things. You don't need to be, all consumed with whatever the latest trend is. And this is actually a big error I see in a lot of business strategy contexts where, leaders of companies think like, oh, we need to be on the cutting edge of the latest thing. What's our AI strategy? When the metaverse was a thing, what's our metaverse strategy? And I think that that's a bit of an error. I think what's more important is if you're really clear about what problem you're trying to solve, what, you really care about addressing, then navigating the world of emerging technologies and exponential growth becomes like exploring a shopping mall of possibilities of tools that could potentially allow you to solve that problem. I just think it's a different way of orienting toward a conversation about emerging technology, and it seems quite obvious or straightforward, but I actually see a lot of companies and kind of get this wrong, where they just fixate on a technology for its own sake rather than keeping in mind what it is they actually care about solving. And I think it gives a way of navigating this radical change in a more empowered way.
So there are risks also in this democratization of technology.
Totally, absolutely. I think this is a big component of what we explore at Singularity, and there's no technological development that doesn't have some kind of both positive and negative implication. The cliche anecdote that a lot of people will say is like, the invention of fire. With fire, you can cook your food, but you can burn down a village, as a way of making that point that every technology is capable of doing positive things for the world, but also bring tremendous risk and harm if used in incorrect ways. And so really the only way to navigate that is to remember that all of these technologies are simply tools, and what we choose as human beings, what we choose to do with those tools becomes the most important aspect of how we actually sort of see the implications or the impact of these technologies in the world in which we live. And so, yeah, there's a ton of risk. We can go to some pretty horrific places imagining the possibilities of, the downside risks of all the technologies that we explore. And what we try to do at Singularity is again, to get people to think about the fact that the world is faced with a variety of huge global emergencies, environmental emergencies, techno-social emergencies, breakdown in trust in our institutions, all kinds of things that show up in different ways around the world. And I'm not saying that technologies are themselves the solution. They're not. Technology is not a solution. But technologies are tools to empower people that have a vision for a kind of problem they want to solve. And so again, what we choose to do with these technologies becomes the most important thing of what will actually happen in the world as a result of deploying these technologies into the world.
So maybe the most important thing is the vision that the human has. So are you optimistic about our vision as a species?
I am. I think I will signal. I think there's a lot of reason for pessimism. I don't mean to discount that. I think that human nature is due for an upgrade. I think that when I say upgrade, I think it really comes down to the fact that this is a deep conversation. I love the question. I am genuinely an optimist, and the reason I'm an optimist is that humanity as a species has faced existential threat throughout its history. There have always been things that seem like intractable problems, that seem like things that we'll never be able to overcome. And I really do believe that every single problem that we face as a civilization, as a society, as a species even, are inherently solvable. I don't think that means we definitely know how to solve them or that we will solve them, that there won't be turbulence in the future and chaos, but I do genuinely believe that there is a solution to almost every problem we face. And human beings have proven throughout our history that we are an innovative, clever, and motivated species. And I believe that it will be painful at times for sure. I don't mean to discount that. But in the long run, I think that we will sort of continue to move forward on this march toward the future that we're moving into. And I'm Mostly, I am an optimist. I do believe that, and there will be future problems that we can't even imagine today. It doesn't mean that we move into this utopia where all problems are solved. That's not the vision. I think that there will always be this sort of evolutionary dance between problems and solutions. And what makes human beings such a special animal is that we are incredible problem solvers.
That's a great closing message. So thank you so much for your time, Aaron.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This is super fun.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Seguimos más adelante. Gracias.